Welcome to Cornell Keynotes. Thank you for checking in with us, viewers. We've got an action-packed show today as we're covering AI for sales and marketing with friend of the show, Clarence Lee, who is joining us from New York City. Clarence, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Chris.
Yeah, you bet. So I've been lucky enough to work with you, Clarence, through the years as a professor and a faculty author of the Cornell Marketing AI Certificate, among other certificate courses and programs offered through Cornell. You've been one of our go-to guys in this space, so I appreciate you joining us today. Clarence, never one to sit still. You've had a lot going on in the year since our last show, which I think was during deep COVID. I think it was 21, maybe early 22. You are founder and CTO at Isengard AI. Tell me what you've been up to in the recent years and what you're working on these days.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So, last time we were chatting, I think I was still on the tenure track at Cornell, and I've spent 7 years teaching digital marketing, brand management, and I was doing research on actually applying deep learning to marketing, sales, and product management problems, right? And so that was great. I think getting the chops of understanding how these cutting edge AI technologies can actually be used by businesses. On the academic side, that was really fulfilling. But what was really always in the back of my mind is I was thinking, gosh, in order for these theories to really have teeth, can it actually go in and be deployed into, let's say, the Fortune 500 or one of these big companies? And can we actually help them leverage, right? And actually increase, dollars back, right? So to me, that's almost like a next lesson in my own personal development. And so I did exactly that with my company. And so over the last 3 years, we managed to stay alive and in the turbulent times. But also it's been fortunate that we are actually post-revenue, and we were able to see some of these things that we were applying back in the research. We've been able to strategically help CEOs, CMOs, CIOs identify points of leverage within the organization and being very thoughtful about how to apply certain type of technology so that it drives returns. And so since then, we've had multiple pilots, deployments, and proud to say we're able to 10x people's investments in this, right? So less so about the sales pitch per se, but I was almost approaching it as like a scientific problem, because to me today, I have ambitions about applying this to various other contexts in the future, right? But in order for that to have teeth, especially in the nonprofit sector, in the for-profit world, we want to make sure that it actually works. So super excited to share some of these learnings from the field today with y'all. And so I'm hoping to leave, the listeners here today with a handful of frameworks and just perspectives and lenses that we've garnered through our, just being in the mud and being in the dirt, but, distilling back out. Hopefully that could save you guys some pain.
Good, perfect. Well, let's begin by learning how you're helping companies that are using AI for various functions, right? Efficiency, high performance, optimization of sales, marketing functions. Where are the opportunities from where you sit right now? Where are the quick wins and the long-term areas of focus that companies need to be focusing on?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So I think one thing that we need to think about, no matter what industry, the folks in the room, you might be doing sales and marketing in CPG, you might be doing sales and marketing in like a fintech startup. At the end of the day, there is usually some sort of customer or consumer outcome you're trying to drive, right? And so based on that, you can ask, hey, these are the outcomes I'm trying to basically affect and change. And what are the levers that I want to dial up and down, whether it's a A/B test that you want to run with your marketing copies, whether it's an email message that you may want to tweak so that you can send out to your highest prospects. It could be actually a pipeline management thing where you might be actually having the data in your customer relationship management tool, your CRM, and be able to get a sense of, my sales team, their most valuable resource is their time and also their relationships. How do we help them think about that so that everybody has 24 hours in a day? How do we make sure that 1 hour that they spend can yield returns? I found that that's at a very high level, the overall patterns that if you want to apply, before we get to the AI, just data to decision making. That's the general pattern that I've noticed that is helpful to think about what use cases are. And reason why you want to do that is because I also unfortunately see a lot of common patterns where folks are just trying to do the latest things, the buzzy stuff, and they have no idea specifically of strategically what are we doing and what are we not doing. And so having this levers and the outcome framework, it kind of helps you think about what are the 2 or 3 outcomes I'm trying to enact. Yeah. And so again, this is one of those things that didn't necessarily come up all by myself. I actually stole it from a book. It's from, I don't know if folks in the audience have heard of Principles by Ray Dalio. It's a book that was shared to me by my co-founder. This book is written by the man that started Bridgewater Associates, right? And so they apply these idea of data-driven decision making to investing. But what I like the most from the book, I mean, there's stuff I agree with, there's stuff I don't agree with, but what I like the most from the book is this idea of being focused on your outcomes and being thoughtful and strategic about what levers you're going to pull up and down to do that is something that we try to tell our clients from the beginning. And so everything kind of falls from there. So happy to talk about the use cases in a little bit more. We can think about applying to marketing and sales, whether it's prospecting, lead gen, pipeline management, so forth, scheduling. We could talk about that, but I want to just start with a high level view, if that makes sense.
Yeah, good. I mean, the things that initially appealed to me were the things that are kind of mundane tasks, things that we get in the weeds with, scheduling. Who do I need to contact? What do I need to do? Right? All of those kind of things. Managing lists, getting your stuff dialed in for the day is the stuff that I found really appealing. Because, again, for salespeople, time is number one, right? That's the thing we need the most. So in our invites, I should mention that we told our viewers in the overview copy for the event that we'd be examining some of the educational concepts, theories, and frameworks that can be applied from your work in the educational space to business, right? And these are the kind of stuff that you teach in your online courses. Can you talk about some of those things where you're taking theory and applying it in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just to start out, right, some definitions. If we think about what frameworks are, these business frameworks, at the end of the day, we can think about, there's the theory that I used to teach, and my colleagues are way smarter than I am. Like they don't come up with their theories themselves, right? It could be in the form of papers, it could be in the form of books, it could be in the form of podcasts itself, that if it's not published. But that theory, usually there's some sort of science behind it. Okay. And so the rigorous theory, when I was mentored as a PhD student, my mentors were telling me, because we're business academics, you got to have the rigorous theory, but without relevance and applying to practice, it's not really helpful, right? And so if you think about this equation of rigorous theory plus applying to practice as the sum of useful business frameworks, let's start there. Okay, so that's what a good business framework should do. But what are they, right? You can think about some examples of frameworks. Right? Frameworks are really just, in a business school, we have frameworks galore. If you're going through the 2-year program, right, you're learning about frameworks. That's in marketing and finance, like what DCF is, and a whole bunch of acronyms, let's say. Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of that applied to marketing and sales, but then we're going to quickly turn to, well, how can these frameworks could be used strategically by our listeners so that it's not just another slide that you hear in exec ed, but rather, gosh, this might be something that, your direct reports could pull from a large language model and then basically apply it moments before you're about to, like actually use it on real data, right? And so there's a lot of stuff there. So with the listeners that are here, I don't want this to just be another talk about business school frameworks, touting the virtues of it and stuff like that. I wanted to have teeth for you guys, right? And so I think one of the exciting things about generative AI is actually the application of these frameworks to your hyper-contextualized businesses and your context so that it actually has teeth. Okay, so I'll give you some examples from the academic side, right? So, on the academic side, when I was a marketing faculty, so my colleagues in the field, there's a couple frameworks that I found it's a very helpful way to think about your customers in the sales and marketing domain. One of them is this idea called the customer lifetime value. Okay, we all have heard it. A lot of the any VCs that are in the room, right? Anybody that's from Silicon Valley in the room, you've heard of lifetime value, CAC. I think it's even mentioning an episode of Silicon Valley, like the HBO show, right? So fine, right? Lifetime value, what is it? Okay, and so this idea in the academic side, I mentioned books that came out of largely Columbia, Wharton, and HBS, where you got folks like Don Layman, Sunil Gupta, our own at Cornell, Young Hoon Park and Sachin Gupta, for instance, they're all masters at customer analytics. And it's this idea of today, if you're some type of business that have customers that are not only making one-time purchase, but you're making recurrent purchases. How might you use those recurring cash flows you're getting from the customers so that you can model out how their lifetime value is to your business? And from there, you can think about, well, might you prioritize? Okay. And so, that is one idea where when linked with cohort analysis, super powerful to help you think strategically. My team, and I got together a demo to show you exactly what that would look like from a sales director's perspective in just a minute, right? So we'll come back to that. But that's where the academic roots of that looks like. Now, on the academic side, there are some folks where, they took that even further, right? So Dan McCarthy at Emory, he's a Wharton grad. His work, and Pete Fader, they did a lot of something called customer-based corporate valuation. Don't want to steal their thunder, but the whole idea is a really very powerful one where, if you know what the lifetime value of your customers are, and you can figure out and apply other things like the 80-20 rule, the Pareto rule, and all that to it, ideally, you could potentially value at least some direct proportion to your entire business. And if this is a public company, then how do you think about actually using that information to actually trade on the public markets? Right. And so that could apply, that has implications on the private equity markets as well. So all of that is kind of tied together. But why did I start there? The reason why I start there is because lifetime value, this is one of the most powerful ways to actually think about the outcomes that you want to drive. And if it's directly linked to your, public traded value, right, that all the even better. And so in the C-suite, there's a lot of talk of this, but what I've seen actually in my own firsthand experience is that we are just at that turning point where, the last couple of years, I find that a lot of CMOs and CEOs, they're talking about lifetime value, they want to calculate it, but there's always like a little bit of holes in their organizations where that's really preventing them from applying this concept in its full glory. And so
what are those holes? Explain.
Yeah. So for instance, the lifetime value idea, it composes of a couple key pieces, right? And so there's an equation, there's various forms of it. But if you could put a dollar value on your margin, if you could put an idea of what your retention rate looks like, if you have a sense of how many cohorts or how many segments of customers you have, and then what their respective margin, margin retention rate, as well as, let's say, the cost of acquiring a customer, the average cost of that. Yeah. Then you can almost mix that up in a way, throw it in an equation, and then you can put it on there, right? But you can think about a couple of the typical holes that we see is, well, how do we get that data? Oftentimes, even calculating the margin, that sits with finance in an organization. Whereas if you are the head of sales or the VP of sales, you might not have that data readily to disseminate it out to your directors. So data all in separate places, they're kind of sitting all around. How do you actually merge that together so it's consistent and also makes sense? The other thing also is like differences in definition. Uh-huh. This idea of a disconnect from the very top, the C-suite, all the way down to the actual salespeople on the ground. I mean, sales folks, right? They're rewarded for having, very targeted attention spans, right, and being able to focus on the next thing. And they should operate that way. But if you want to sit them down and go and actually sit down and do an Excel sheet to calculate lifetime value, and they have to go coordinate with 5 people to figure out what the retention rate looks like. Wait, what is a cohort? Remind me that again, right? Yeah. You can see it adds up. Now, what's exciting about everything I just said, if you go back and actually play the video, the audio, each one of those things I said, you can actually now, at some point, turn it in a query into a language model so that some type of generative AI can actually help you figure the data out and also play it back to you. So we'll show you an example of that, but that's on the academic side. And now on the practitioner side, we've heard of books that are not necessarily the newest ones out there, but it's been vetted by the C-suite, right? CROs, CMOs. On the marketing side, there's the classic How Brands Grow. Yeah, these are our colleagues coming out of Australia. But, this is something where my own students, when they're interning in Procter & Gamble, they really need to just know that stuff cold. So reading a book, but then P&G internships aren't exactly a walk in the park. So when you're late at night trying to figure out, wait, what are the concepts from the book? How do I think about double jeopardy? Didn't you wish there could be some type of assistant that's almost co-piloting with you throughout to remind you of that? So that's one book from the marketing side, and there's way more I could give you guys. On the sales side, I'll give you one old and one new one, right? The older one is something called the challenger sale. We've heard CMOs, CEOs, CROs kind of like playing that back to us, right? Saying, okay, cool. Can you help me apply the principles in the challenger sale to my org? A new one, especially for the listeners that are in the tech audience. There's a Cornell alumnus, I believe, forgetting his name right now, but it's a book called Game of Sales. It's from his the author's experience as a big tech sales leader, at the Googles of the world, right? And so that's something where literally there's like a chapter in there talking about, well, how do I achieve perfect focus through proven business frameworks? And so that's something where, just want to give the audience a sense of what are frameworks, how are they helpful? And to me, the biggest opportunity is that before the generative AI stage, it's really hard to apply these frameworks, and there's a certain bar that you need to pass in order to be able to actually apply it. And that's where a lot of these consultants come in. But with the latest developments in generative AI over the last, 24 months, there's a lot we can do now that we don't need to have a call to McKinsey to apply this.
Yeah, that was David Perry on Game of Sales. So let's talk about the recent developments. I have you here. I want to get your take. Just the last few weeks, we've seen huge news, kind of blockbuster blitzes from OpenAI, a really big one, right? Chat 4.0, Google and Microsoft. What do you think about what's going on right now as it relates to what you've just set the table with in the previous 18 minutes here?
Yeah. So, Chris, why do I do this? I'll give you guys one idea that I think all the big tech companies are talking about. Mm-hmm. That's going to be important for the next 6 to 12 months. And I'll maybe mention one idea that they're not talking about. Okay. And so let's start with the idea that they're talking about. So I think for the next 6 to 12 months, the business world will be talking about agents. Yeah. And so Karin's going to give a whole session on this, right? So I think he gave a talk last week. I encourage the listeners to go check it out. I think that's a fantastic overview of what's happening with generative AI. But I don't want to steal his thunder. But the basic idea about agents is it's like that's the next evolution of how we as individuals as well as businesses can really leverage the power of generative AI. So you think about what the last 24 months, you have ChatGPT, you have Amazon, their version, you have Microsoft's Copilot and all that. Essentially, the way you access it is you open up a browser or you can download their app on a phone, and you would ask it prompts. You would ask it things, and it would give you recommendations, right? It's almost like a search engine, but much smarter, right? And you can ask it, okay, to write code for you. You can ask it to, maybe figure out, verify certain things. Does it make sense? Does it not? And even now there's like tools that it could call where you can ask it to go and actually invoke a search tool where it can actually go on the internet and search query for you. You can actually have a tool that it connects to a database. Fine. Okay, so that's chatbots up to this point. Now, the difference between chatbots and what agents are is that agents do not just recommend and answer your questions for you, but rather it can actually execute actions for you. Mm-hmm. So for instance, instead of you asking it to just write and draft a letter of an email to certain wording, it can send an email for you. Instead of going to Amazon and actually, do reviews and, summarize some of the reviews on a certain product that you're looking at, you can actually task it based on certain judgment of things to go and actually purchase a product for you, right? And so, Chris, if we have time later on, happy to kind of go back into that and it showed exact examples of, what agents can do. Yeah, but that's what everybody's talking about right now. I'm sure you guys are going to find, dozens, if not like tons and tons of videos about what agents are. Microsoft talked about it, I think, more than a month ago. Google talked about it a month and a half ago. Amazon just did this. I think it was like last week or the week before, right? And so, you can expect everybody's going to have their own say about it. So encourage the listeners to go out there and kind of Google and just watch every snippets of what Amazon's take on it is, what Google's take on it is, what OpenAI's take on it is, and Microsoft's take on it is. They all have their own little flavor. But agents, that's the talk of the town this year.
You can almost feel the demand for this kind of thing that you've just described. And one thing that's notable, we've been looking at this over the last couple of weeks in the recent advances among OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and in generative AI is that there seems to be kind of a reconciliation of the tools or kind of functional integration, right? Certainly in the case of GPT 4.0, that's exactly what we saw. It was kind of doing all the stuff. Can you kind of explain a little bit about what is happening? Because what I'm getting at is that the technical advances, not super groundbreaking, but the reconciliation, the integration, the confluence of those things functionally working together was really striking. That was the thing that really kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the confluence, right? And so I want to give a big caveat. This is one of those things where a lot of this confluence right now that we're talking about, it's based on the transformer type of sequential large language model based architecture that came out back in, 2018, 2017 by Google. So what I'm about to say kind of applies to that train of thought, right? But what's interesting for the audience too, if the folks that want to see also like what might be coming down, further down, that's coming out. Jan LeCun from, I might have mispronounced his name, but he's an expert on AI, and he's with Meta and also NYU. But I thought a lot of the work that he's actually talking about related to the Jetpack architecture, right? So joint embedding, these like that idea, as well as how to actually get AI to help you plan. That's just beyond the whole large language model. I'm going to pare back, the tokens I've seen before, right, in my training. I just want to start, I want to start there. I'm just going to put that out there. That's the caveat. But based on that, the language models, I think one of the ideas that I think Bill Gates talked about is with Microsoft, there's this idea of having a smart AI that can really be personalized and knows you. That is something that is like the million or the $1 billion question, right? Everybody's trying to figure out how to build that. And so the question is, how do we get to that? And what are the missing pieces to that, right? And so holding the LLM structure fixed, and there's other ways to get to this, but holding the LLM structure fixed, I see a lot of people talking about how to build smart bots, but I don't hear a lot of people talking about how to build wise bots. Having this idea of not just having an AI to be able to play back information to you and it knows you, but rather how can you have an AI that guides you? Because it knows best practices. It knows it's seen, given certain industries or cross industries, what are not just what to do, but actually what not to do and how best to do it, right? That's the kind of slight difference that it's a little more nuanced, but traditionally in the pre-AI stage, these are the roles of the consultants that are out there. The McKinseys, the Bains, the BCGs, they're brought into a company to guide a company's leaders to think about strategically, what do we not do? What are the best practices? How do we actually do the same exact thing, but do it in a slightly different way so that it yields maximum output? So, Chris, I think, on the slide right now, I put together a visual for y'all, right? And so we think about where current AI is, and this might be actually in the past now already, but right. I want to borrow this comment, this word from this phrase from Karn in the last session. He called it, I think, something like, current AI is like cheap dumbness.
Yes, that's right.
Is that right? Yeah, it's so like, not to disparage all the amazing things that OpenAI and the researchers out there have done with LLMs, but the focus on the current AI is this idea that it has reasoning, it has natural language, and so you can think about these LLMs as really good reasoning engines, right? I'm going to steal a page from Andrew Ng. That's what he was talking about, how to think about the current LLMs. And if you look at all the keynotes that are coming from all the big tech companies, we're basically getting to here. This smart AI that knows you. Now, how does it know you? In this space, there is a hot word of the past 12 months called RAG systems, and it stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. Also came out of academia, but then it's being applied by not just big tech companies, but some of the biggest vendors out there in Silicon Valley, right? And so everybody's kind of doing the RAG things. But what is a RAG? At the end of the day, it's a smart bot that can actually not only reason and have natural language, but it can also connect to your own data and documents. So think about your SharePoint, right? Be able to connect it to your Copilot, and it's able to peruse all that. But that's fine, right? It can remind you of things, it can do all that stuff. But what we really want is to get to the stage where the AI itself, in the moments when I forget things or I confuse things, right? My brain fails. it could almost guide me in the way that I want it to.
What would be an example?
Yeah, so let me give you an example for that, right? So this is where the business frameworks come in. And so I actually have I have a demo I can show you guys, but a very simple case is, as a entrepreneur now, I'm juggling 50 different things. I'm sure the sales leaders and also the marketing leaders are out there are not so different. Every Sunday, I sit down, I think about my weekly planning. What are the most important priorities this week? What am I going to do? And more importantly, what am I not going to do? And so this idea of, there's so many times in which I'm like, on Sundays, I'm like, I just finished putting my kids down for the night. I'm tired. My brain's not really working. Trying to choose what I'm going to do this week and what I'm going to encourage my team to focus on and what not to focus on. It has to be tied back to our quarterly goals, our monthly, milestones, right? What are we going to say to our investors and so forth? Just in the same way that if you're a sales marketing leader, I'm sure you have your annual targets, you have your quarterly business, review, you have your monthly business review, right? So there's almost a thread and an arc that in the natural cadence of your business, you need to basically operate. So consistency is really hard for human beings to do, right? But imagine having an AI that knows all that context, but then are able to pull in frameworks from books, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Getting to Yes, Atomic Habits, so that I can almost hack my brain to do, what the aspiring optimal Clarence could do, where most of the times I'm not optimal, right? And I'm just like, oh my God, I'm just trying to put it together, right? And so I think that's one of the, at a very high level, that's one particular use case. I'd love to show you guys that, right? When I'm saying that, this is very, okay, that sounds great, Clarence, but does it actually work? How does it actually work? And so anyways, I'm going to stop there. That's one use case. There's plenty of ways to actually play into that.
The thing that I found kind of intriguing, and I go to the the place of unintended consequences, right? What happens when we do liberate ourselves from all these other tasks and functions that we need to do, and we are actually just empowered to do our work nonstop, right? It'll just be interesting to see how, what happens with our brains once we become that much more focused and are liberated from so many of these other things, and empowered by best practice and texts and all those kind of things.
Yeah, Chris, I think I'd love to. Maybe we should have another conversation about that.
Yeah.
Gosh, I could have a whole session talking about that. I think there is an idea about freeing up time with AI, but then the separate idea is, what are you going to do with all that additional time? Right. Yeah, and so should there be a framework for that? Should it be a mandate? My way of thinking about it is, no, it should be you, right? Like deciding what do you enjoy doing, what's going to get you to thrive. All of us, we're a little bit different, right, from each other, right? There's some things that we just love thinking about, some things that we just absolutely hate doing. Is there a version in the near future that we can at least get to where if you can almost spot out and identify, in your own routine, what are the things that you hate, right? Yeah. These blocks that are just preventing you from getting the next level, and be able to potentially have these micro agents to help you. That's one way to do it from a micro level. From the macro level, imagine, as a leader, as a manager, if you're able to identify all those spots, in your organization, right? And so, and maybe I can show you an example of what that looks like. I've seen how people can remove these blocks that people might have in a sales marketing organization.
Would you please? Yeah, let's do it. Let's check this out. So what are we going to be looking at here?
Yeah, so if we actually bring up the visual right here, what you're looking at here is, I was trying to think about, if today you're a leader in an organization, how might AI help you? Now, I'm going to give you guys like a 1-2 punch kind of framework to think about it. I'm not going to tell you what to do, right? But this is very logical, right? It's not rocket science, but what we found, this is helpful in our initial engagements with our clients in this setting up piece, right? This white glove piece where we're just basically doing integrations. We sit down with them, we talk to the C-suite, we talk to the different heads of the orgs that are in the organization. We ask them one very simple thing. We ask them, in your organization right now, what are the highest points of leverage that can give you either that increase in revenues or cost cutting or some type of outcome that you need to report out to your investors or board? So we start from the top, very top. Okay, so very clearly define the level of magnitude and the outcomes that we need to hit. Now, after that, typically we find that if there's a sales team in the organization, marketing and sales are like the first front lines for that because that's where the revenue comes from, right? And so what I'm about to tell you can actually apply to marketing as well, but let's focus on the sales org. So if we focus on the sales org, one way to actually dive into that would be to think about, we can start by looking at the natural cadence of your organization, right? And so, as we mentioned before, for a sales team, the time is most valuable, right? And that applies all the way up to the head of sales. And so if we actually think about today, what their time looks like in a given year, zoom that back down to their quarterly, their monthly, and their weekly, that's how one might actually look at and diagnose their organization. Okay. And so if we look at this, we can actually drill all the way down to say, okay, today, as we're getting our team to really, blow their quotas out of the water, do we start from the top? Do we start from the bottom? Do we start in the middle? Your call. For all the audience listening today, it could be you guys could be in various stages of digital transformation, right? And different various stages of data quality. So it might be at the bottom. It might be at the top. Doesn't matter. But one of the things that we hear consistently that is a block to data quality in a sales organization is the fact that their sales reps don't track, or at least don't track reliably. And why is that? Well, if you think about it, what we hear from sales folks is they're busy, they're on the road, right? They're trying to figure out whom to actually go talk to. And, the best sales reps, right, are planning this each week. Whom are they going to visit, right? It could be 20 people all the way up to, let's say, 60 people in a given week if they're crazy about visiting. But that implies, in a given day, right, you might actually have no more than 7 to 10 people. That's a lot already to visit. Okay, so they actually might plan out their visits, and they actually have to go and drive, actually visit the customers, and then they got to close the sales to meet the quota. So not rocket science. This is kind of how their thing is. But what you'll notice here, what's in red, is this idea that, well, these are the parts which we found that, planning and also like getting to that closing the sale, that's usually kind of the most painful parts as a salesperson, right? Like, sales folks are really outgoing, they're gregarious. As they're visiting the folks, they're really good at doing that. But having those tough conversations, how do you actually frame it, as well as whom do they prioritize in actually planning? Those are some of the issues that we saw. Okay, so you'll find other red spots as we go up, but this is like very tactically, okay, in the week of a given customer, you might actually find this. So let's bring back the business frameworks. Now, I'm going to just steal from Sunil Gupta's book, Driving Digital Strategy, who's my advisor for back at HBS. So he won't get mad at me
Okay.
for stealing his stuff. But one of the things I really like from his book is this idea that if you're a sales marketing leader at the top, how do you think about acquiring, you're retaining your customers and expanding it, and linking it back to a company level lifetime value? That's the big strategic idea of how to prioritize, right? So if you identify, I think even Tim Ferriss talked about it in his book, like his original South by Southwest talk way back before he was famous. He talked about applying the Pareto principle to his actual list of customers, right? So you'll find that if for the folks that are listening in the room that knows who Tim Ferriss is, I highly encourage you guys to check out his book. But long story short, this is essentially what Sunil talks about. So if your directors have already did that strategy and deciding, okay, who should you plan, right? What are the high value customers? That solves a lot of the pain for you. You can just go and say, all right, if you have something I could tell you, these are the 5 people I need to visit this week. They're high priority. Let's go double down on that. Let's go and visit them, right? Like that's one example. Another example is closing. Now, the Challenger sale, not to give away the punchline, but it's this idea that all sales reps out there and selling styles can be distilled into, I think, 5 or 6 different types of styles. And there's this idea that great sales folks are made, not born. So what that means is if you knew which one of these styles can yield you the maximum closing, you probably want to learn how to actually adopt that style, right? And that's the idea of the Challenger style. There's very specific things, like 3 things that you do. I think it was like teaching for differentiation, tailoring for resonance, and then there was also like take control of the sale, right? Anyways, that's a framework, right? So instead of having a talking head like me talking to you about how to apply that, what if you have a generative AI that can remind you right before you're about to go drive out to that person this week, I'm going to go talk to Chris, can close a sale. What if it could actually show me, okay, here is resume state. Here's like where your last talking script that you're planning to talk to Chris about. Here's some new information that's come in about Chris's priorities. Let's adjust the script so that I can go talk to him. Yeah. And so there's ideas about how agents and actually could automate some of these things for you also, right? So I can talk about that, but love to. So that's the idea of how we bring it all the way from the very top, all the way down to the ground level in the day of a given salesperson could apply a framework. Love to show you how that actually works in potential demo if we have time.
Yeah, let's roll.
Okay. So let's go there. So what I'm going to load up here next is an example of what we do for our clients, right? So Isengard, what we do is we basically help the enterprise from the mid-tier companies all the way to the Fortune 500, basically sit up on top of your sales and marketing data, your CRM, and really help your people on the ground make use of that. Okay, so let's say I'm the salesperson, what we talked about before. I log into it. Now, let's think about what current AI, smart AI, and wise AI might do. Okay, so the current AI, you could ask it and converse with questions, right? So I might go and actually, ask it to, tell me a professor joke, let's say, right? Or tell me a joke. You can do that with ChatGPT. And this right now is actually connected to a language model. It's connected to a Llama 3. It's actually running my laptop. So I'm hoping, Chris, if my laptop goes down, you'll know what happened.
Okay.
It's like overcomputed. But you can tell like this is something that's very similar to what happens if you talk to OpenAI. Why did a corny joke, right? I asked it to give me a corny joke. That's current AI. Okay. That's the cheap dumbness that Karna was talking about.
Yeah.
Now, what does a smart AI to have access to your context look like? Okay. And so you can think about right here where when I'm starting my day, I can see, okay, good morning, Clarence. This is what your schedule looks like. These are my 3 appointments in the day. And on the top left right here, I see, okay, well, my current progress is I helped made 980K this year so far. It's June already, and I'm more than halfway to that 1.5 million yearly end target. So I'm rolling. I'm like killing it, right? And so, of course, I could come out to, figuring out weekly, monthly, what are the questions there? We'll get to that in just a minute. But what a smart AI here would do would be, you notice right here, this is tied to my calendar. It could see that I'm going to go talk to Dr. Terry, and then in the morning, I could talk to Dr. Schneider. I'm going to talk to Dr. Tom Burns. Like, let's say I'm a pharma rep or a medical sales rep. My wife is in the medical space, so I'm just going to use that example because I know the best, right? And so, today, being able to have access to which Dr. Terry Smith is, because it's connected to my company database, it's behind the firewalls of it, for me to be able to click on it and then be able to go see, oh, okay, this is the Dr. Smith from St. John's Riverside. Let's go and actually look at some of the background information on the website. Cool. That's like stuff that is like, just what every smart AI should be able to do for you nowadays. Okay. Now, being able to see my lunch with Dr. Tom Burns, this was up at Riverside by Westchester. I need to go see Dr. Schneider in Montefiore, and then be able to go to Weill Cornell, let's say, right? Like, can you maybe tell me about what did Dr. Tom Burns, what did we discuss last time before I go visit? So I made some notes through my CRM last time before when I was finishing my meeting with Dr. Tom Burns. So maybe I go in and say, hey, what did we last discuss with Dr. Burns? And what it does is now it's going to go into the database, right? And it's going to go and actually look up my notes. Oh, I've talked to Dr. Tom Burns or Dr. Burns back on Friday, a couple weeks ago. Here are my notes. I need to follow up on the invoice. I need to basically ask about out of stock SKUs, standard stuff, right? We hear it from sales folks all the time. But instead of going to some sort of dashboard, some sort of Power BI or Tableau, I have no idea as a sales rep where it is. I can just have access to it on my phone and then be able to ask something like, help me pull the invoice from 510, that store, right? And then so it would go into there, pull up the actual invoice snapshot, and give it to you right there. So I can actually show it to my client, for instance. Okay. So that is a smart bot. And it might be able to, let's say, can you help me map my morning? Let's say. Okay, so it goes in there, figures out I need to visit these three folks. I'm up here in Westchester. And so it actually goes and enters all that in Google Maps and then basically gives me a link. And then now I can go and see, oh, I'm coming from over here and up at New Rochelle, and I need to drive to St. John's, go to Monty, and then boom, end up at New York Presbyterian, something like that, right? And so very standard stuff. To your point about the confluence of technology, any smart co-pilot should be able to do for you right now. Now, what is the smart, the wise AI might do? So you see right over here, this day, week, month, and quarter. This was actually set based on that way. Let's say today, my VP of sales wanted all of us, all the sales rep, to really go through this cadence. So being able to, think about, okay, today, as I'm mapping my week, what are my top priorities? As we talked about earlier, close Dr. Burns. Okay, got it. Cold call some more folks. Prep the route with my sales director, right? Like just reminding me what that is. Because when I get tired, when I get busy, I don't have no idea. I mean, it might be sitting in these priorities in some sort of sheet somewhere, but ideally, at a finger away, could remind me of that. Now, imagine with agents, instead of just going to actually remind me of what Dr. Burns and how to close it, imagine if the agent can go and craft a sales pitch for me by pulling in the latest updates about Dr. Burns, finding the 8 new contacts, right? The agent goes out there connected to Google's API, Google Maps API, and figuring out, I'm going to be on this route. What are the customers I could talk to? If, let's say, Dr. Schneider is not in the office, that's tool calling. That's an example of that. And then prep the route with my sales director. Well, my sales director about to come down and meet with me next week, and we're going to go on the road together. How do I show up to that meeting prepared and have all that planned? In the old school world, I need to go out and actually type in on myself, figuring out what exactly and prepare for contingencies, right? I'm a little OCD. That's what I would do. But what if the agent could actually plan out 3 routes already for me on that and recommend to me what the routes, right? And so this is where the confluence of language models, as well as more older school technologies like recommendation engines, predictive analytics, and all that stuff could come in. But then let's say, you go into the month, can you help me map my morning, right? And then so, previous month, you discussed the following issues with my sales director. Be able to just pull up a dashboard at a moment's click of being able to show my sales director what is my coverage in my territory, and be able to go see, oh, this is our dashboard that's showing these are the sales opportunities in my area. These are the areas which I've been calling, and these are the visitor and stuff like that. So you can see confluence of both new school technology with old school technology. Sorry for jumping around. So you can see how with this stuff, there's a lot of stuff you could do just with this framework itself of how to think about day to quarter, but there's more. What you're just seeing is essentially how I would run my company. You might run your company in a different way. You actually might want to think about, hey, as a sales director, you want to think about, hey, I want to actually use Sunil's framework of bringing in customer lifetime value. The reason why I want my reps to go in and focus on that 100 customers is because there's a report that we've been talking about at the strategic level where this is something called cohort analysis and a retention diagram. And I'm trying to figure out how do I fix these places in red? And if I get my team to go and fix these things, if I fix cohort A, we gain $5 million. If we fix cohort B, oh, wait, we actually gain $20 million back, right? So having that kind of data, being at fingertips, you can do this all day. You can go back to the challenger sale, being able to see, hey, out of all my customers, how many more are unaccounted for and how many more are in the tailor, the take control, and the teaching stage. You could do that with how brands grow, what we talked about earlier, right? Hey, these are the things that in the book that as I'm reading it, remind me what the double jeopardy concept is at the next customer meeting. Why don't loyalty matters? And then even a definition to the mental availability. What is that? I can never remember that. And then lastly, I can imagine these books out there, Atomic Habits, for instance. My wife loves that book. Mm-hmm. Reminding you that as you're reading through it, you're halfway through it. Your next chapter is this. But then, do you want me to actually co-read it for you? Summarize it for you, suggest tips and stuff like that, right? Like the possibility are endless. So to kind of tie it back to this, the educational point, with eCornell, what's really exciting is there's all these classes that we offer. All these professors that are taught at Cornell much longer than I have, right? They come up with their own frameworks and stuff like that. Any one of those classes could be actually bottled up as a framework and put into alongside an LLM. And so that instead of just folks that have the time to take in a course, they can actually not only do that, but also have almost something that they can take away with them at the end of the course and guide them on the job itself, right? And so, sorry for the long-winded, show, but this is something that I'm super excited about because I think for the first time in human history, a lot of this knowledge that's kind of locked in our ivory towers of the Ivy Leagues, it could be unleashed and open to folks that weren't as fortunate as we are to be able to come out here, right? And so, want to just say why I'm excited about that and also how this actually could turn the stuff that we teach in education, something so bite-sizable and so easily used that it could be used, by a lot of people out there, up, down, front and center in any organizations.
Yeah, you can almost hear the gears turning within our sales and marketing viewers' heads, right? It gave me a million ideas. I really appreciate the demo. And of course, the context laid around it was perfect. We've got some viewer questions here I want to hit. Clarence, if you don't mind. And thank you for those. Shout out to Peter for submitting 3 or 4, which is great. One thing that I was thinking as you were offering the demo here, well, Peter asks this. He asks, how can a company be sure that AI acquired data is true, real, and worth using for strategic business decisions? My head went into disaster mode, right? AI is only going to give it what you allow it access to. You're providing the reading material, so to speak. And if it doesn't have integrity, it could even screw things up even worse than if it was never. I think you know where I'm going with this, right? So if everybody's sharing bad data, it was already dangerous. But when we've got AI, trying to guide behavior in the form of, like you've just described, right? The wise assistant, disastrous, right? There must be increasing priority as it relates to data integrity and all of this. How do you think about this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Here's how I think about it. I want to challenge everybody in the room to think about the following alternative. Okay. Let's forget about AI for a minute.
All right.
Imagine you have a new hire, a junior, fresh college grad or MBA grad that you just added into your org. They're smart, they're well-meaning, presumably, yeah, and then also they can reason and logic. That's essentially, think about applying to your question, right? Making sure that that person that is like your new hire, how would you make sure that they don't screw up your company? Yeah, and so there are typical ways of actually making sure that you check up on them, making sure that you're actually giving them certain bounds of delegation, right? What do you have the authority to do versus not? I think there's another book.
Sure.
I think there's I can't remember who the author is, but in my learning as a manager, this book is called, I think it's called, like, if you're doing it yourself, you're doing it wrong. And this idea of, how do you actually think about, and all of you guys in the room have done this, for a long time. It's like, how do you think about being very clear about what can your direct reports do and not do? So the authority, giving them examples of what looks good and what looks bad, as well as if there's certain things of uncertainty, come back and check with a person, either me or somebody else, right? So let's take those idea for a direct report, a human. You can easily just swap out that statement I just had there for an AI. When you bring an AI into your organization, you don't want to do the big bang approach. You want to be very strategic about it. You want to think about, I think Carl was talking about this too, right? And challenging the leaders to think about, well, I want to be educated about it. I want to think about, well, where are the points that I can actually go and actually start using some of these things to yield returns. You want to be very focused about how you apply AI first, so you can do what? You can build trust with it. You can understand exactly what can it do, what can it not do, and what kind of situations will it hallucinate, will it not hallucinate, and so forth. And then lastly, you notice all the examples I gave you, a lot of it's like, hey, remind me of this, remind me of that.
Yes.
It's connected to a certain database, right? That's very intentional, because we found that, yes, the language model is going to get better and better, right? The big tech companies are doing that. But their job is to make sure that the AI can be used for general purpose domain. Us in business, specifically let's say sales and marketing, a lot of times we have certain lingos, certain jargon, certain ways of doing things, even within our own company, that kind of dictates what's inbounds and out of bounds. Well, use that information to your advantage and build in checkpoints, just like you would do with an inexperienced grad. Now, there's an actual systematic way of doing that. It's called reinforcement learning with human feedback. And so there's ways to actually design the AI such that you could be having chatbots that are interacting with your employees. There may be agents that you're deploying for very routine tasks around. And one of the craziest ideas about agents, I'm not going to talk too much about it on the call today, is this idea that you typically have an org chart in your organization. But what's going to happen going forward in the future as you start deploying agents, you're going to start having networks of agents as well. Mm-hmm. So you might have but rather you might have an AI chart, org chart, where you're showing exactly within your org chart, what are the places where you're deploying AI and be able to monitor that, be able to see that, right? So you can imagine even having an agent itself that's designed as a supervisor agent that's going to help you to see, hey, given the last month, what are the reports of hallucination? Which part of the org is happening? How are you using it, right? That's all data you can actually query. And that stuff, I'm not dreaming up. You could do that right now. And people are starting to do that. If you guys want, we could do that for you, but I want you guys to start thinking about it that way so that you're almost designing in the old world, as a leader, you're thinking about what your org chart looks like so that your company can outperform other companies. In this new world, you're going to have that, but also an AI org layer that meshes with that. What does that look like for your company? Do you even know? Going through that exercise will be absolutely crucial before you deploy this in large scale.
I think that's critical, and it's really instructive as well. And it got me thinking about where we want this conversation to go right now. So perfect. You had mentioned that the key, and something that Karen mentioned a little earlier, is what to build and where to put it, right? So if you envision the org chart, the opportunities start to present themselves. How do you think about that? How do you advise for that, for those that are just getting into this, right? Sales and marketing friends, specific or otherwise?
Yeah. So I think Karen made a couple good points I want to reiterate. And I found that true in my own experience as well. When I was doing research on AI, it was hard to keep up.
Yeah.
Latest research, right? Because new stuff are coming out every day. And if you were just kind of chasing, what's the latest fad, it's really hard to distill the signal from the noise, so to say. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what he said that I thought was very helpful is before you go in and try to keep up, it's important for you to have a mental model of what's important and what's not, how it's going to help with your context, right? What do you as an organization care about? So I think I'll mention his framework and I'll give you guys one or two to think about. One is this idea of I think he talked about having an internal mental model to understand what can AI do in terms of capabilities, right? I think he talked about classification, he talked about generation, he talked about inference, and there's a couple more, right? So he can go into that, right? And so if you're thinking about, what your agents can do, you can think about, okay, well, is this a task that I as a human being doing right now? Is it classification? Is it generating a report? Is it inferring something from data, right? And so being able to at least put those tasks out and lay it out like that, that's super helpful. Simple example, for instance, imagine today if you were to ask me, Chris, let's say I'm your team on eCornell. You asked me to write an email to respond to your customer inquiries. It might be a block diagram where you're expecting me to go figure out, well, this email, what is the nature of it? Is it somebody complaining about my course? Is it somebody actually praising, oh yeah, this is super helpful? Or is it just somebody that's like, oh, I ate a sandwich, thank you. It's like some random email, let's say, right? So that's an example of classification. If you just take that and actually give it to a prompt right now in the form of an agent, it can classify for you by giving it bounds. I encourage everybody out there, if you have access to OpenAI, go into the custom GPTs and just put the prompts in like that, and you can see how well that does. If you want me to actually write that email, that's generation. That's generating a text and stuff like that. So you guys get the idea. That's basically, the framework of a mental model, what AI can do and cannot. Now, on top of that, I want you guys to think about also for any use case that you're thinking about, maybe think about this use case as either a steam engine, it's either a steam engine, it's a slide rule, or it's a crane. What does that mean, right? So steam engines, it replaced the horse, right? It could replace a human, right? Much like the loom did, right? It replaced a human effort. Where is this use case, you're just going to replace a human and there's no human in the loop. That's the first one. The second one with the
Slide rule.
what do you call it? Yeah, the slide rule. Chris, I don't know if you ever used the slide rule, but
It's been some time.
it's basically a calculator, right? It
Yeah.
augments our ability to calculate things and so forth. And then so augmentation, that's the use cases there. And then the crane is basically using an AI to do things that was not possible before. So, today there's actually candidate drugs that are being suggested by AI, where the research itself is able to progress at a level that was never possible before without AI, right? And so think about strategically, any use cases you encounter, what are you going to basically do to do that? And then lastly, I'll flash up a slide for y'all, so you can take away with y'all is, in just a little bit, but go using that, armed with that, those two frameworks, that one from me, one from Karan. How do you then go into your organization and diagnose those red spots so that you can say, hey, that's an opportunity for augmentation, that's an opportunity for replacement, and that's a real opportunity for crane right there. Usually it's the easiest to start out with augmentation, right? So I wouldn't start by replacing. And in fact, it doesn't make sense to replace initially. So I'll stop there. I know that we're coming up on time.
Great, good. Would you kick up slide 10, please? Let's take a look at that real quick and maybe give us a little context, because I do want our audience to take that away. And everything you've set us up with prior to this, I think leads us to it. So let's see if we can check out slide 10 before we go.
Yeah. So slide 10, that's the agents, right?
Yeah.
Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just get there real quick.
Perfect. It should be kicked up in just a moment. Let me mention something while we have our audience here and making sure that gets displayed. Viewers, I want to drop a URL for you. We're doing several AI events. We've been mentioning one that took place on May 22nd, I believe, and we're doing another one with Karan Girotra on July 1st. So we're going to share those URLs. Get registered for those. And naturally, the recording for this one will be available right after we're done, Clarence. So if anybody wants to share with friends or colleagues, absolutely do so. So what are we looking at slide 10 here?
Yeah, so just a cheat sheet for the folks that are in the room wondering what agents are, right? A simple way to think about agents. I'm stealing from Amazon, right? This is what they talk about in their keynote. Agents are AI that can help you plan, assess, and execute actions. What does that look like? It's basically a confluence of three concepts together. There's these prompts that we have out there. Respond to my customer's email for me, okay? And so when you're doing something like that, you might want to actually pull the relevant notes from your SharePoint so you have the information about the customers, right? That's essentially an idea of tool calling. And then there's this idea of what's called a chain, where you might have multiple prompts that you want to pull together in sequence. So you can almost like direct and tell the agent, whenever you're doing this, don't just go randomly do stuff, but instead follow the sequence. Go and help me categorize this email, what it's all about. Based on that, here's how you pull the relevant notes from my SharePoint. If somebody's complaining, go and pull that document from legal, and we want to make sure we incorporate in that. Somebody's really happy about this, maybe pull up their, what's like the notes about them and actually echo back and personalize that note so that, they feel heard. Things like that, right? And then respond to it, So putting that all together, that's how you have an agent. I'm really glossing over a lot of details here. Happy to talk about that in a separate session, but I think Karan's got a lot of exciting stuff for y'all on this.
Clarence Lee, I really appreciate your clear-headed, measured delivery, the way you kind of go about this whole thing. It's been very instructive for me, as always. For me, my most desired outcome is to learn a lot and have fun, and you've helped out with both of those. So I appreciate it very much. Thank you for joining us from New York City, and I wish you best of luck. We'll connect soon, I hope.
Absolutely, Chris. Yeah.
All right.
And for folks who are interested, we're going to start a blog series about some of these questions. And so just go into our website, isengard.ai. Hopefully we can help you guys stay up to speed about sales and marketing use cases and so forth.
Perfect. Great. Viewers, thank you for your questions and thank you for joining today. We'll see you next time on the next keynote. Take care.